They called him Invincible, the black stallion that once flew down tracks like a shadow on fire, swallowing ground with each thunderous stride. He wasn't just fast, he was feral, electric, a phenomenon that made seasoned trainers whisper and gamblers hold their breath. Race after race, he devoured the finish line like it owed him something. There was a fury in him, but not the kind born from fear. It was something older, something forged in his bones. He didn't run for praise. He ran because he had to. They named him Stormborn for a reason, because when he ran, the sky seemed to follow, and for a season, he was untouchable. But all storms break. It happened so fast, people barely saw it. One moment he was sprinting down the backstretch at Belmont, the next he was crashing. Legs tangled, body twisted, a cry that split the crowd open. They said it was a freak accident, but the rumors said otherwise, that maybe he'd been pushed too far, that maybe the people who were supposed to protect him were the ones who broke him. Needles, whips, silence. No one said it out loud, but the silence was louder than truth. After the fall, he disappeared, just gone. No official statement, no retirement parade, just a closed stable door and a trail of whispers. Some said he was euthanized, others claimed he was sold in a backroom deal, renamed, hidden away. The headlines moved on, the trophies gathered dust, and the horse once worshipped like a god became a ghost. Trainers tried to work with him. He threw them all. Vets tried to sedate him. He broke through stall doors. His name, whatever they called him now, was blacklisted. Dangerous, defective, untrainable. Years passed. He was shuffled from place to place, his legend dimming, fading into footnotes and what-ifs. No more fans, no more finish lines, just steel gates and wary hands. The fire inside him hadn't gone out. It had just turned inward, burning slow and bitter. The people who passed through his life stopped seeing a horse. They saw a liability, a cautionary tale, something to be avoided. And then came the auction, private, exclusive, hidden in plain sight among million-dollar thoroughbreds with polished coats and perfect pedigrees. No one was expecting him. He wasn't on the catalogue, not officially, but there he was, a late edition, lot number 46. No pedigree, no history, just a single note beside his name. Temperamental, high risk, not for amateur handlers. No one looked at him twice. They should have. The city was never quiet, not even at night. Sirens sang lullabies to street lamps, and car horns punctuated every hour like impatient metronomes. But inside a small apartment tucked between a row of aging brownstones, there lived a boy who didn't listen to any of it. While the world buzzed outside his window, Jamie's mind galloped somewhere far away, across wild meadows and beneath open skies, where hooves thundered like a beating heart, and every breath carried the scent of hay and sweat and speed. He wasn't like the other kids on his block. He didn't care about video games or superheroes or shiny sneakers. What fascinated him were fetlocks and bridles, bloodlines and race splits. While his classmates obsessed over who could do the best bicycle tricks, Jamie was memorizing the lineage of Kentucky Derby winners and sketching out saddle placements in the margins of his homework. He had never touched a horse in real life, not once, but in his head he'd ridden 1,000 of them. His bedroom was more like a shrine than a living space. The walls were plastered with clippings from racing magazines, most of them saved from library discard piles or printed in grayscale from the ancient home printer his parents kept meaning to replace. There were photos of legendary stallions frozen mid-gallop, newspaper headlines from old victories, and quotes scribbled in Sharpie across the frame of his bunk bed. Things like, "A good rider can hear his horse speak. A great rider can hear him whisper." Even his bed sheets were patterned with silhouettes of mustangs in flight. His parents had once tried to redecorate, suggesting a more modern theme, but Jamie had burst into tears at the thought. They hadn't brought it up since. Every afternoon after school, he'd barrel through the front door, toss his backpack somewhere vaguely in the direction of the sofa, and race to the kitchen where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest. Not to scroll through cartoons or chat with friends, Jamie had one daily appointment that he never missed. A video call, a voice that steadied him more than any building ever could. "Hey, Grandpa," he'd chirp the moment the connection clicked in. And there, hundreds of miles away, in a Montana kitchen bathed in golden sun, his grandfather always smiled like he'd been waiting all day just to hear that voice. Their conversations were never about math homework or what Jamie ate for lunch. They were about stride angles, gait habits, how to tell if a horse was holding back or just tired. Jamie would rattle off facts like bullets from a revolver. Did you know Ruffian never lost a race unless you count the one she didn't finish? And that Seabiscuit's heart was twice as big as normal? While his grandfather listened, chuckled, and corrected him only when necessary. Close, kiddo. It was Secretariat whose heart was nearly double-sized. Seabiscuit was all heart, but in the metaphorical sense. It was the one part of Jamie's day where he didn't feel like he had to explain himself, because his grandfather got it. He'd been a jockey once, famous in his own circle, though you'd never hear it from him. His name wasn't on billboards or in Hall of Fame museums, but to Jamie, he might as well have been the president of the horse world. Retired now, with silver hair and a laugh that sounded like wind through barn doors, he lived on a modest ranch where the sky seemed to go on forever, and the loudest thing you'd hear was the clink of a bridle or the slow exhale of a resting mare. Jamie lived for those calls. They were the only thing keeping his dream alive in a place where dreams didn't run. They sat in traffic. His parents loved him, sure, but they didn't understand him. They worried about him. He didn't join team sports. He didn't go to birthday parties. He didn't talk to kids his own age unless they shared his obsession, and none of them did. Once, when his mother gently suggested he should try being a little more normal, Jamie had just looked at her and said, "Normal doesn't have hooves." She didn't bring it up again. Then came the morning everything changed. Jamie had just opened the fridge, hunting for a granola bar before school, when he saw it. A note stuck to the juice carton. Simple handwriting, 4 words. "Pack your bags, cowboy," and beneath that, "You're headed west." His heart skipped. He froze. Then read it again. His backpack hit the floor with a thud, and within seconds the entire apartment echoed with his shout. 3 days later, he stepped off a small regional plane into a world that didn't hum or buzz or screech. It breathed. The air in Montana was different. Cooler, thinner, filled with scents he didn't recognize, but felt like he'd always known. Sagebrush, pine, dust. A silence that didn't press down on your ears, but pulled your thoughts out like a rope from a well. His grandfather was there, waiting at the edge of the tarmac, in boots older than Jamie's entire wardrobe, and a smile that could have melted snow. "Welcome home," he said before Jamie even said a word. Home. Not the apartment with the rattling heater, not the bus stop with chewing gum on the benches. This place with its wide skies and whispering fences and horses waiting just beyond the barn walls. Jamie didn't even know yet what was coming, didn't know about the auction, the black stallion, the moment that would change everything. But something inside him already understood, something old and wild and galloping buried deep in his chest. The city had raised his body, but his soul had always lived here. He didn't know why he felt drawn to that particular part of the auction grounds. They'd already walked past rows of glittering horses, sleek, sculpted creatures groomed within an inch of perfection, names that sounded like royalty or race car brands. Each one posed in their stall as if aware of the cameras, aware of the money, bred for glory, priced for status. Most had handlers in pressed shirts, whispering to investors and buyers about performance records and sires with 6-figure reputations. Jamie admired them, sure, but he didn't feel anything, not really. They were beautiful, impressive, but they didn't look back. They didn't see him. Then he saw the gate. It was different from the others, not polished metal or glossy wood, but a raw iron panel hastily bolted to the wall. The sign wasn't engraved or even laminated, just a sheet of paper taped on with a single line, Lot 46, caution advised. There was no crowd, no clipboard-wielding agent. Just a man with arms like steel cables leaning back against the far wall, his eyes watching the store like he didn't trust it for a second. Jamie stepped closer, the noise of the auction fading behind him like a distant tide. Inside, shadowed by poor lighting and facing away from the entrance, stood the horse. He was bigger than the rest, not in height, but in presence. His body was pure muscle wrapped in a black coat so dark it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. His mane was tangled, long and unbrushed. One ear flicked back at the sound of approaching steps. His tail snapped once like a whip. The man guarding the stall stepped forward instinctively, a hand on the latch. "Careful, kid," he warned. "This one's got a mean streak." Jamie didn't answer. His mouth had gone dry, because something in him was already stirring, already pulling memories forward, lines from old articles, whispers from forums, pieces of stories too fractured to mean anything on their own. But now they clicked together like magnets finding their match. The scar along the flank, the flash of white on the left front hoof, the unlisted entry, the behavioral warnings. His heart thudded. It couldn't be. Not him. Not here. He leaned in a little closer, studying the horse's face, the way his muscles coiled even when standing still. He was alert, like he was always preparing for the worst. And then, those eyes. Wild, yes, fierce. But underneath the fire was something else. Not madness, not rage, fear, not cowering fear, but the kind that lives in creatures who've been betrayed too many times. The kind of fear that turns into refusal, the refusal to trust, to yield, to believe. The handler shifted again. "They say he's been passed from stable to stable. Nobody can work with him. He's dangerous. Last trainer tried to saddle him and ended up in the ER with 4 broken ribs." He lowered his voice slightly. "Truth is, we were supposed to send him back. No bids expected. The auction house didn't want him scaring off the buyers, but the owner insisted. Said to list him under private entry." Jamie took another step forward, ignoring the warning. His mind was racing, flipping through facts, flashes of memories. The story from a racing blog no one read anymore. The description of the black stallion that vanished after a controversial fall, sold in secrecy, name changed, trainer's silence bought. No one had ever confirmed the details, but Jamie remembered. He always remembered. And then, without thinking, without planning, the word left his lips. Stormborn. He didn't shout it. He didn't even mean to say it out loud. It came out in a whisper like it had been waiting inside him the whole time, biding its time until the right moment. The horse froze. Every muscle in his body locked. He didn't rear. He didn't snort. He just stopped, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire world. Slowly, his head turned toward Jamie, mane sliding across his face like a curtain parting. And his eyes, those eyes locked on the boy, wide and alert, no longer chaotic but focused, sharp, searching. His ears perked forward, a flick of recognition. Not noise, not command, recognition. The handler blinked, stepping backward. "What did you say?" Jamie didn't answer. His throat felt tight, his legs trembling. Because he didn't know, he hadn't meant to, but somehow, deep in the archives of his horse-obsessed brain, that name had risen like a ghost, and the horse had answered it. And then, just like that, the spell snapped. The stallion spun, slammed a hoof against the back of the stall, and let out a scream so sharp and sudden it sent a ripple through the nearby stalls. But it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't wild rage. It was something older, raw, alive, not violence, voice. Jamie stepped back, stunned. In the arena just beyond, an announcer's voice crackled over the speakers. "Now, presenting Lot 46, a private and final entry for tonight's event." His voice hesitated, uncertain. "No official pedigree, no recorded victories. Behavioral risks have been noted. Proceed with caution." The handler grabbed the lead line with both hands, dragging the stallion from the stall. He resisted at first, but not like before. This time, it felt deliberate. Like he wasn't being dragged, he was choosing to walk, like he wanted to be seen. Jamie watched, heart pounding, as the horse stepped into the auction ring, lit by the sterile glow of spotlights. Gasps echoed through the amphitheater. The stallion reared once, twice, nostrils flared, eyes wild, but they were looking, searching. And then, as Jamie made his way toward the balcony rail, he felt it again. The eyes, that impossible connection, that impossible certainty. Stormborn remembered. For a moment, no one moved. Not the handlers gripping the rope, not the announcer who had gone completely silent mid-sentence, and not the sea of well-dressed bidders who sat frozen in velvet chairs, champagne flutes held halfway to their lips. Even the stallion, wild-eyed and gleaming like obsidian under the harsh lights, stood utterly still, hooves planted like he was made of stone. The name had echoed through the dome, not shouted, but carried with a force that couldn't be ignored. Stormborn. It wasn't a command, it wasn't a guess, it was truth given voice, and somehow, inexplicably, everyone in that room felt it. Something had shifted, something had landed, like the final puzzle piece falling into place after years of not knowing what picture you were even trying to build. The stallion's head turned, slowly, methodically, scanning the balcony. Not with panic, not with rage, but with intent. His eyes locked with Jamie's again, this time not in curiosity, but in recognition. Real recognition. Not the kind a horse has when they remember a smell or a movement. This was deeper, older. The crowd still hadn't found its breath. The handler tugged the rope, trying to reassert control, but the horse didn't flinch. His ears twitched. His body stayed grounded. One muscle in his shoulder rippled, then went still again. The air was thick enough to slice. Then the auctioneer cleared his throat shakily, like he wasn't sure if the moment had passed or if it was safe to speak. We will begin the bidding at $5,000. 5,000. Do we have 5? He trailed off because no one responded. No paddles raised. No murmurs. People were whispering, yes, but it wasn't the usual auction house chatter. It was uncertainty, awe, disbelief. This wasn't just another racehorse anymore. This was something else. Something that didn't belong to price tags or bloodlines. Something that looked like it had stepped out of a forgotten legend. Jamie's breath caught in his throat. He turned to his grandfather beside him, eyes wide, every muscle in his body tense with a mixture of hope and urgency. "Grandpa, that's him. It really is." The older man didn't answer right away. His gaze was locked on the ring, his face unreadable. Then he nodded once, slowly. "I think you're right." "Are you going to bid?" Jamie whispered, voice barely holding steady. Adam exhaled, long, slow, like someone preparing to cross a line they weren't sure they were allowed to cross anymore. "He's not a project, Jamie, not a pet. That's not a horse you own. That's a horse you partner with, if he lets you. If he doesn't, no amount of money in the world's going to matter." Jamie nodded, lips pressed together. He understood, more than Adam expected him to. "But if no one else bids," his voice cracked, "what happens to him?" Adam didn't answer. He didn't have to. Another moment passed. Still no bids. "Do I hear $5,000? The auctioneer tried again, his voice slightly more desperate now. "He's strong. He's rare. Untapped potential. A bold investment." No hands moved. A few guests exchanged nervous glances, more cautious now than curious. Someone near the front muttered something about insurance liability. Someone else shook their head. "Too risky," another voice said. "No papers, no record, might not even be rideable." And then, from the very back of the room, a paddle rose. 5,000, Adam said, his voice calm, his arms steady. The auctioneer's eyes widened. "We have 5,000. Do I hear 6? Silence. 1 second, 2, 10. 6? No. The pause dragged. "Going once?" Jamie clenched his hands into fists. "Going twice." He held his breath. "Sold." The gavel came down like a heartbeat. Whispers erupted across the room. Not applause. Not yet. Just disbelief. Because everyone had expected the horse to be pulled, unsold, sent back to wherever he came from. to wherever dangerous horses go when people stop believing they're worth saving. But now he had a name, now he had a person, and not just anyone, a retired jockey with calloused hands and a reputation for working with horses no one else could touch. Jamie turned to Adam so fast he nearly lost his balance. "You did it!" Adam didn't answer. He was still staring at the ring, still reading the horse's body language like an old poem. He'd seen hundreds, maybe thousands of horses in his life, but this one had something different behind the eyes. Not wildness, not fear, will. Something that had refused to break, no matter how many people had tried. As the stallion was led away, a little calmer now, Jamie followed with his gaze, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a race himself. "Why do you think he stopped when I said his name?" Adam finally looked at him. "Because no one's called him that in a long, long time." And then, after a moment, he added something softer, something not quite meant to be heard but still spoken aloud. And maybe he was waiting for someone to remember who he was. The trailer rattled down the gravel road, its suspension creaking with every bend, as if even the vehicle could feel the weight of what it carried. Inside, the black stallion stood silent but far from still, muscles twitching, ears swiveling. His breath came in slow, heavy bursts, fogging the air around his muzzle. He didn't panic, he didn't rear, but his eyes didn't close either. They stayed wide, alert, scanning the shadows as if expecting old hands to return. Cruel hands, hands that hit instead of helped, that tore instead of taught. There was no screaming now, no lashing out, but there was no peace either. Only that humming tension, the kind that coils just beneath the skin when the body has learned never to fully rest. Adam drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, one on the gear shift. He kept glancing in the rearview mirror, not at the road, but at the trailer, like he could see through steel and plywood if he focused hard enough. Jamie sat beside him, feet barely touching the floor, backpack still on his lap. He hadn't said a word since they pulled away from the auction arena, not because he was tired, but because he was afraid to break the moment, as if the wrong sound might startle the universe into realizing it had made a mistake, that somehow they weren't supposed to have him, that this wasn't supposed to happen. The sun was starting to dip behind the Montana ridges, bleeding streaks of orange and crimson across the sky. Shadows stretched long and slow across the open fields. The world felt quieter out here, like it was holding its breath too. Jamie rolled down his window halfway. The wind hit his face, crisp and wild, and for a second he imagined what the horse must be thinking back there, alone in the dark, carried down unfamiliar roads, caged once again. But this time was different. Back at the ranch, preparations had already been made. Adam didn't have a staff or a crew, just calloused hands and the kind of knowledge that comes from decades in barns. He'd cleared out the old stall in the corner, sturdy, reinforced, but not confining. No chains, no restraints, just thick straw laid fresh, a rubber mat on the floor to ease the pressure on joints, worn down by years of training, and a water bucket refilled every few hours so it would be cold when they arrived. He didn't light the barn with bright fluorescence. Just one old lantern hung near the entrance, casting a soft golden glow that flickered like a campfire. Enough light to see, not enough to overwhelm, enough to invite. When they finally pulled into the gravel drive, the tires crunched softly beneath them. The barn door was open, just a little. The evening breeze fluttered through it like an exhale. Adam parked the truck, killed the engine, and let the quiet settle. Jamie didn't move right away. He was staring at the trailer like it held a secret too sacred to touch. Adam opened his door first. "Let's take it slow," he said, and Jamie nodded, though his heart was hammering in his chest. They walked around to the back of the trailer. Adam unlatched the ramp with practiced ease, the metal hinges groaning like old bones. He didn't throw the door open. He let it lower slowly, giving the stallion time to adjust to the shift in light and space. Inside, the horse stood tall, unmoving, his eyes catching the light like polished stone. No whites showing, no snorting, but not relaxed either. A statue carved in wariness. Adam reached for the lead rope, then paused. "You want to try?" he asked, looking at Jamie. The boy's eyes widened. "Me?" Adam nodded. "Just hold it. Don't pull. Don't ask. Just let him see you mean no harm." Jamie stepped forward, hands shaking, and took the end of the rope. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, heart in his throat, offering nothing but presence. After a long moment, the stallion blinked. His ears didn't pin, his head didn't lower, but he took one step, then another. The ramp creaked beneath his weight as he walked out, slow, deliberate, his body taut as a drawn bow. He didn't rear, he didn't bolt, he simply walked forward, eyes scanning the barnyard, nostrils flaring at every unfamiliar scent. But he moved, willingly. That was everything. They led him to the stall, the door already open. No one forced him inside. Adam stood just beside the entrance, letting the rope hang loose. The stallion stopped in front of it, head high, scanning the interior. It smelled like straw, leather, old wood, and something softer, something like safety. The horse stepped in without being asked. Jamie didn't breathe until the latch clicked shut behind him. Inside, the stallion turned once, twice, then stood. He didn't paw. He didn't whinny. He didn't collapse in fear or rage. He stood with his head high and his ears swiveling, watching, thinking, measuring. Jamie sat down just outside the stall, cross-legged in the dirt, eyes fixed on him like he was watching a miracle unfold. Adam leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching both of them. "You did good," he said quietly. Jamie nodded, still watching the horse. "He's not dangerous." "No," Adam agreed. "He's just been hurt by people who didn't listen." They stayed out there for hours. Neither of them spoke much. The barn settled into its nighttime rhythm, the gentle shifting of hooves, the soft sigh of a breeze slipping through the rafters, the creak of old wood adjusting to the cooler air. It wasn't silence, it was something deeper, a quiet that heals instead of hiding. Adam didn't go back inside that night. He grabbed an old stool, set it just outside the stall, and sat down with a mug of coffee that went cold in his hands. Jamie eventually dozed off against a hay bale, one arm wrapped around his knees, and inside the stall, the stallion, Stormborn, stood alone, but not abandoned. For the first time in years, he wasn't locked away out of fear. He wasn't a beast to be controlled or sold off in shame. He wasn't forced to prove his worth with speed or submission. He was home. And though he didn't understand the word, not in the way humans did, something in him softened. Just a fraction. A muscle loosened. A breath deepened. He didn't lie down, not yet. But he closed one eye. Just for a moment, just enough to say, "I'm watching, but I'm not running. Not tonight." Morning came gently on the ranch, the sky painting itself in soft strokes of lavender and peach as the first light spilled over the distant ridge. The barn creaked as it warmed, its old bones stretching in the rising sun. Birds chirped without urgency, and the scent of dew still clung to the grass. In the stall, Stormborn stood exactly where he had been for most of the night, silent, unmoving, eyes open and alert. His body didn't twitch, didn't pace. But that stillness wasn't calm. It was practiced. It was the kind of stillness animals learn in places where noise invites pain. Every sound, every gust of wind, every shifting shadow was accounted for. He hadn't earned trust. He'd only been offered space, and space wasn't the same as safety. Not yet. Jamie was up before the sun finished rising, still in flannel pajamas and mismatched socks, tiptoeing through the kitchen to grab a slice of cold toast from yesterday. He didn't wake his grandfather. He didn't need to. Some part of him knew that Adam was already out there, that the barn would already be awake. The boy grabbed his sketchbook, tucked a pencil behind one ear, and padded across the yard with sleep still clinging to the corners of his eyes. When he reached the barn, he didn't go in loudly. He didn't run. He stepped inside like someone entering a library or a church, his movements quiet, careful, respectful. Stormborn's ears flicked toward the sound, but he didn't move otherwise. Jamie sat down just outside the stall, cross-legged in the straw, not too close, not too far. He opened his sketchbook to a blank page, rested it against his knees, and began to draw, not from memory, but from life. Every line, every angle of the stallion's face, the tilt of his ears, the scar that cut across the dark of his flank like a faded story someone tried to erase. He didn't talk, he didn't whistle, he didn't reach through the bars. He simply looked and drew and breathed. Hours passed like that, marked only by the shifting of sunlight across the barn floor and the occasional flutter of dust motes rising in golden beams. At one point, Adam stepped in, a mug of coffee in hand, and paused when he saw them. He didn't speak either. He just leaned against the doorway and watched, a boy and a horse, both of them saying nothing, both of them saying everything. There were no commands, no cues, no attempts to train or control, just presence. Quiet, unassuming presence. That was the first real offering. Not a carrot, not a rope, not a pat on the nose, just the willingness to wait. Over the next few days, this became a rhythm. Jamie didn't try to ride him. He didn't even try to touch him. Every morning, he showed up with a different book, sometimes a novel, sometimes an old magazine filled with racing articles, and sat just outside the stall reading softly. His voice never rose above a murmur. Sometimes he'd pause to sketch, sometimes to think. Stormborn began to shift closer, not quickly, not obviously, but every day his hooves were just a little nearer to the gate. One morning, Jamie looked up and found the stallion's nose resting just inches from the bars, close enough to reach through. He didn't. He just smiled and kept reading. Adam started leaving the barn door open a little longer each evening, letting the light stretch in, letting the wind move through. He adjusted the stall's latch so it made less noise when opened. Small things, intentional things. He watched how the horse reacted to changes in tone, in sound, in motion. He noticed that Stormborn didn't flinch at thunder but stiffened at the creak of leather, that he didn't bolt at barking dogs but turned his head sharply whenever boots clicked on concrete. The past lived in the horse's body like an unfinished story. Every scar told a sentence, every twitch spoke volumes, but Adam didn't rush to read them. He waited too. The breakthrough didn't happen with a bang. It came in a breath. Late one afternoon, as the sun slipped low and the barn was bathed in orange and gold, Jamie reached down to grab his fallen pencil and felt something warm press against his shoulder. He froze, turned his head slowly. Stormborn was there, standing at the gate, muzzle extended, breath soft against Jamie's shirt. The boy didn't move, didn't gasp. He simply closed his eyes and whispered, "It's okay. You're okay." And the horse didn't move away. Later that night, Adam sat on the porch, watching fireflies flicker in the darkness, a blanket draped over his lap. Jamie sat beside him, still wide awake, knees pulled up to his chest. "He touched me today," Jamie said quietly. Adam looked over. "I know," he replied. "I saw." The boy turned toward him, unsure. "What do you think it means?" Adam sipped his tea, considering. "I think it means he's still in there. Somewhere beneath the fight, beneath the silence, there's still a horse who wants to be seen." That night, Jamie didn't dream of races or trophies. He dreamed of open fields and slow walks, of a horse who listened, of a voice he didn't have to raise to be heard. And in the stall, Stormborn stood facing the open slats, ears forward, eyes softer than they'd been in years. He didn't lie down. Not yet. But he didn't stand guard either. That chapter of waiting had ended. A new one had just begun. The day started like any other, quiet and slow, with the kind of sunrise that didn't blaze so much as stretch itself lazily over the hills. Mist hovered over the pastures like breath on glass, and the barn was still except for the occasional shuffle of hooves or the gentle knock of a water bucket against wood. Jamie arrived early, as usual, a blanket still wrapped around his shoulders and yesterday's socks bunched at the heels. He carried two things in his arms, an old hardcover book and a folded newspaper clipping, the edges worn from how many times he'd unfolded and refolded it in his room, staring at the picture that lived inside. Today wasn't about reading out loud. Today was about searching for something deeper, confirmation, memory, truth. Stormborn was already awake, ears perked, nostrils flaring slightly as Jamie stepped into view. He didn't startle anymore. That fear had receded like a storm passed over the horizon, still present but distant, no longer pressing at the gates of every moment. He stood near the stall door, head low, eyes calm, waiting. Jamie didn't sit down right away. He stepped closer than he ever had before, just beyond the bars, and held up the clipping. "I want to show you something," he whispered. The picture wasn't perfect. It was grainy, black and white, clipped from a half-page article buried at the back of an equestrian journal. Most readers had skipped right over it, but Jamie hadn't. The stallion in the photo was younger, leaner, but unmistakably the same. Arched neck, proud stance, a blaze of white tracing down one front hoof like lightning caught in motion. And just below the photo, a name, Night's Shadow. That's what they had called him after the fall, after they took everything else. Jamie pressed the clipping gently against the bars, not expecting the horse to read it, but hoping something in him might still recognize the face in that photo. "They tried to rename you," he said, voice low. "Tried to erase what happened, tried to bury what they did." He paused, letting his fingers trail across the paper. But they didn't know someone was paying attention. Stormborn didn't move, but his ears flicked, catching the rhythm of Jamie's voice. The boy continued, more to himself now than anyone else. "The article said you were pulled from the Triple Crown circuit after a fall, said it was suspicious, that no official injuries were listed, that the trainer refused to comment. Then, just like that, you vanished. No sale record, no retirement announcement, just silence." Adam had known. Jamie hadn't asked, but he'd seen it in his grandfather's eyes when he brought the clipping to the breakfast table. A flicker of recognition, a tension in his jaw. He hadn't tried to deny it. He'd just taken the article, read it in full, and set it down without a word. That silence said more than anything else. "Why didn't anyone stop it?" Jamie had asked softly, his fork pushing scrambled eggs in slow circles across his plate. If people knew something was wrong, why didn't they do anything? Adam's answer was quiet and heavy. Because sometimes the people who care can't speak loud enough to be heard, and the ones who can, don't. That stuck with Jamie. And now, standing outside the stall, holding a memory that was never meant to survive, he felt that weight pressing into his chest. "You didn't just fall, did you?" he whispered. "They hurt you. They pushed you too far, and when you couldn't give them what they wanted, they threw you away." The horse moved then. Not much, just a shift of weight, a step closer to the gate, but it was enough to make Jamie pause. He looked up into the stallion's eyes and saw something flicker there, recognition maybe, not of the article, not of the photograph, but of the pain behind the words, of the truth finally given shape. "I don't want to pretend it didn't happen," Jamie continued. "I don't want to fix you. I just want you to know I see it. I see you." Later that afternoon, Adam joined him by the paddock. He leaned on the fence rail, arms crossed, eyes scanning the wide-open space where Stormborn now walked freely. No ropes, no bridles, just wind, grass, and sky. Jamie stood beside him, quiet. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of thought, full of things that didn't need to be said out loud. "You were right," Adam said eventually. His name before the fall was Night's Shadow. Madden was the trainer. Brilliant, sure, but ruthless. I saw the way he pushed his horses. Always more, always faster. And when one of them couldn't keep up, he let the thought trail off. Jamie didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the horse. "Do you think he remembers?" Adam's voice was soft. "I think horses remember everything. They just don't always show it the way we expect. Sometimes it lives in their eyes, sometimes in their silence, sometimes in what they stopped doing, because nobody ever asked them if they were okay. Stormborn raised his head then, ears forward, eyes bright, and for a moment he just stared at them. Adam and Jamie, two quiet figures leaning against an old fence under an open sky. Then he took a few steps, slow and sure, and stood just within arm's reach. Jamie didn't move to touch him. He didn't need to. "He's not broken," Jamie said after a while. "They just stopped listening." Adam nodded slowly. "So now we start again, not from scratch, just from truth." That night, Jamie sat on his bed, the article folded neatly on his nightstand beside a stack of horsebooks and a flashlight dimming from overuse. He traced the photo one last time with the tip of his finger, memorizing every line, every angle, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to honor what had been forgotten. Stormborn had once been Night's shadow. Before that, maybe something else entirely, but none of those names mattered now. What mattered was that someone remembered, someone saw the scar and didn't look away. Someone said the name that brought him back, and now, for the first time in years, the horse was starting to believe he hadn't been lost at all. Just waiting. It began with a whisper, not from a person, not even from the wind, but from something in the air that both horse and boy seemed to feel at the same time. A shift, a readiness. Days had turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the ranch had settled into something quiet and sacred. Every morning, Jamie arrived at the barn with a book, a pencil, or simply a presence. Stormborn, once a creature that rattled stall doors and wore fear like armor, now stood waiting, not passive, not tamed, but listening. His ears would flick the moment Jamie's boots hit the gravel. His body would lean forward, not in demand, but in invitation. And slowly, without anyone saying it aloud, they both began to wonder the same thing. What comes next? It wasn't about riding. Not really. Jamie didn't dream of racing him or parading him in front of crowds, but somewhere deep inside, he had always believed Stormborn wasn't meant to spend the rest of his life behind a gate. This wasn't a horse designed for confinement. He was made for motion. And so, on a morning just like any other, Jamie paused outside the barn, hand on the latch, and whispered a question that wasn't quite a command. "Want to go for a walk?" He didn't have a halter, no saddle, no lead, just an open gate and the soft pressure of trust. Stormborn didn't respond right away. He shifted his weight, tilted his head. For a long, uncertain moment, Jamie thought he'd misunderstood, that maybe it was too soon. But then the stallion moved, one hoof, then another, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. He stepped out of the stall and into the aisle, his shoulders rolling like waves as he adjusted to open space. Jamie stepped back, giving him room, heart pounding with something that felt both electric and still. Stormborn paused at the doorway, blinked once against the sun, then walked into the world. It wasn't dramatic. There was no gallop, no wild rearing, just two figures walking side by side, one small, barefoot, barely past first grade, and the other powerful, muscled, forged by storms. Together they crossed the barnyard, past the hay bales stacked like old stone walls, and moved into the field where wildflowers dotted the tall grass like paint on canvas. Adam watched from a distance, leaning on the porch railing, arms folded across his chest, his expression unreadable. He didn't interfere. He didn't even speak. He knew better than to interrupt what was unfolding. They walked to the cottonwood tree at the edge of the field, the one with roots that twisted like questions. Jamie sat beneath it, sketchbook in his lap. Stormborn didn't stray. He circled the area once, nostrils flaring at the wind, then lowered his head and began to graze, never far, always within sight. The moment held. Later that afternoon, Jamie spoke the thought that had been building for days. "I don't want to ride him," he said to Adam over dinner, pushing peas into slow spirals on his plate. "Not yet. I want him to choose it." Adam nodded slowly, setting his fork down. "That's not something most people would wait for." Jamie shrugged. Most people didn't see what I saw the first time I said his name. The next morning, they didn't go to the stall. They went to the paddock instead. Adam stood nearby, silent, as Jamie opened the gate and stepped inside. This time, Stormborn was already waiting near the fence. Jamie didn't ask him to come. He just stood still and let the air do the talking. The stallion took a few steps, circled, then stopped at Jamie's side. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. And then came the day that changed everything. The clouds hung low, like thoughts too heavy to hold. Rain threatened, but didn't fall. The earth was damp. The breeze was thick with the scent of new grass and distant thunder. Jamie had a halter in his hands for the first time. Not to use, but just to hold. He sat on the barn floor, legs stretched out, the halter resting beside him like a question he hadn't found the words for yet. Stormborn approached slowly, with his usual grace. He didn't flinch at the halter. He didn't retreat. Instead, he lowered his head and nudged it with his nose, then looked at Jamie as if to say, "If you're ready, I am too." Jamie stood up, hands trembling, and whispered, "Only if you want to." Stormborn dipped his head again. It wasn't perfect. The halter didn't go on smoothly. His ears twitched. His muscles tensed for a heartbeat. But Jamie waited. He didn't rush. And when the last strap was gently fastened, when the weight of the leather settled against the stallion's proud neck, he didn't pull. He just walked forward. Stormborn followed. Out into the pasture they went, first at a walk, then a slow trot. Jamie didn't lead him. He simply moved, and the horse matched his pace, step for step, breath for breath, as if some invisible string connected them, a thread made not of rope, but of something far stronger: respect. From the porch, Adam watched, breath caught in his throat. This wasn't training. This wasn't recovery. This was reclamation. The boy who had never ridden, and the horse no one could handle, walking as if they'd always belonged together. Jamie stopped at the center of the field and turned slowly. Stormborn halted beside him, ears forward, eyes bright, and then, without warning, the stallion broke into a canter, not wild, not frightened, free. A run that didn't ask permission, a run that didn't flee. It circled wide and clean, legs stretching, tail flowing behind him like a banner reclaimed from dust. Jamie watched, heart full, eyes wide. The wind kicked up, brushing his hair, and somewhere deep in his chest, something answered. This wasn't just a horse running. This was a soul remembering how to fly. And when Stormborn returned, when he came to a soft stop beside the boy, who had never forced him, never begged him, only waited, he lowered his head and pressed it to Jamie's chest, not as an apology, not as surrender, but as thanks. The flyer came in the mail, folded between a feed catalogue and an envelope with no return address. At first, Adam nearly tossed it in the fire bin with the rest of the junk. Promotional postcards, tractor sales, a coupon for some new brand of horse supplements he didn't trust, but something made him pause. It was the logo in the top corner. Old, simple, but unforgettable. Two horses crossing mid-stride, silhouettes in a circle. It was the emblem of the state fairgrounds, an event he hadn't set foot in for almost 2 decades. He unfolded the paper slowly, the way you handle a letter from someone you once loved but haven't heard from in years. Across the top in bold script were the words, "End of Summer Celebration and Showcase," featuring local legends past and present. His eyes scanned the schedule. Pie contests, barrel racing, a rodeo for the little ones, and then, down at the bottom in smaller print, a line that made him stop breathing for a moment. Closing exhibition on a ride, a tribute to those who never quit, riders wanted, veterans encouraged. He read it twice, then again, then set it down like it had burned him. That evening, Jamie found him on the porch, flyer tucked under his elbow, eyes fixed on the horizon as the sun slipped down behind the pasture. The boy sat next to him without speaking, the silence between them easy. Finally, Adam handed over the flyer, and Jamie read it with growing eyes. "Are you going to do it?" he asked quietly. Adam didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of his coffee, now cold, and leaned back in his chair. "I haven't ridden in front of a crowd since long before you were born." Jamie nodded, but didn't press. He didn't need to. The seed had already been planted. The next morning, before the mist had lifted from the grass, Adam was out by the barn with his old saddle. He hadn't touched it in years. The leather was worn but still strong, the stitching a little frayed but intact. He ran his hand over the seat, remembering the weight of it under him during the long runs, the thrill of wind on his face, the way time disappeared when you and a horse moved as one. He cleaned the saddle that morning in silence, polishing the metal buckles, oiling the leather with the care of someone tending to more than an object, tending to memory. Jamie watched from the fence line. He didn't ask if it was for the fair. He didn't need to. The look on his grandfather's face was all the answer he needed. That week was filled with quiet preparations. Adam didn't make a big announcement. He didn't practice in front of anyone, but every afternoon he led Stormborn into the open pasture, saddled him carefully, slowly, letting the weight settle, letting the horse remember what it felt like without associating it with fear. The first time, Stormborn flinched, not violently, just enough to hesitate. Adam didn't push. He waited. The second time, the stallion stood still. The third time, he walked with the saddle on, circling the field at a gentle pace, not out of command, but out of trust. Adam didn't climb into the saddle yet, not until the horse told him it was time. It was Jamie who suggested the name for the event entry. "Don't put it under Stormborn," he said, watching the stallion graze with his usual quiet strength. "Put it under his real name, the one they tried to bury." Adam raised an eyebrow. "Night's Shadow?" Jamie nodded. "Only this time let's show them what he really became." When they arrived at the fairgrounds, it was like stepping into another life. Banners flapped in the wind. Children ran with sticky hands and painted faces. The scent of kettle corn and dust and sun-warmed hay filled the air. Music played somewhere in the distance, fiddles and guitars, laughter and cheers. But Adam felt none of that at first. What he felt was weight, not from nerves, but from history. He walked slowly, boots pressing into the dirt, Stormborn at his side, every step deliberate, every breath quiet. People turned when they saw them, not because of fanfare, there was none, but because something about the pair demanded attention. Adam in his old denim jacket, hat pulled low, Stormborn gleaming in the sun, every muscle lean and defined, moving like smoke wrapped in muscle. Some recognized Adam. More than a few whispered his name, but he didn't wave, didn't nod. He had nothing to prove to anyone anymore. Jamie walked beside them until they reached the warm-up pen, then stepped back. "You sure?" he asked one last time. Adam gave him a half-smile. "I'm not here to win, kid. I'm here to remember." When the announcer called for the final exhibition entry, the crowd hushed. There were no fireworks, no roaring intro, just the clear voice over the loudspeakers. Night's Shadow with Adam Reeve, in honor of Trust Reborn. The gate opened. Stormborn stepped into the ring like he owned it, not like a show horse, not like a prize, but like a story returning to its final chapter. The crowd leaned in, phones raised, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. There was something sacred about the silence. Adam didn't urge him into a gallop. He didn't even guide him sharply. He just let the stallion move, feeling the rhythm build naturally. A walk turned to a trot, then to a canter. Not fast, not flashy, just honest, just free. The two of them moved in a circle, the kind that had no beginning and no end. A boy stood at the edge of the arena with wide eyes and his heart in his throat. His grandfather sat tall in the saddle, and the horse who had once been called dangerous now moved with grace, as if the past no longer pulled at his heels. Then came the gallop. It wasn't the sprint of a racer. It wasn't for time or trophies. It was a gallop for the sake of movement itself. Like the wind had finally come to meet him, like the air had remembered how to part around him. Stormborn flew across the arena, mane streaming, hooves thunder-soft on packed dirt, and the crowd rose to their feet, not with wild cheers, but with awe. When they slowed to a stop, Adam lowered his head. Stormborn exhaled once, deep and steady. The ring was still. Then came the applause. Slow at first, then faster, then thunderous. Jamie ran to meet them, tears shining in his eyes. He didn't shout. He just touched Stormborn's flank and whispered, "You were meant to be seen." Adam dismounted, knees stiff but heart-light, and pressed his hand to the stallion's neck. "You carried more than just me out there," he said. And Stormborn, Night's shadow, stood proud, not as a legend reborn, but as a soul finally free. The sky over the ranch had started to turn. Summer, once loud with color and heat, now softened into something slower, quieter, touched with gold around the edges. The leaves on the cottonwood whispered differently now, more like secrets than laughter. The mornings came cooler, the evenings stretched longer, and the wind carried that unmistakable scent of transition, dirt and dry hay and something colder creeping in beneath it all. It was the kind of change you couldn't see all at once, but you felt it, the way you feel homesickness before you leave home. Jamie had been trying not to count the days, but the calendar didn't lie. He was going back to the city, the noise, the hallways full of lockers and fluorescent lights, the sound of subway trains instead of hooves, the crowded silence of places where no one looked up. His suitcase sat half-packed by the porch steps, zipper undone, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to be closed yet. He stood by the pasture fence with his arms folded on the top rail, chin resting there, watching Stormborn graze just beyond the rise. The stallion looked different now, not just in body, though he'd filled out, muscled in places that once showed bone and exhaustion, but in presence. He moved like a horse who had nothing left to prove, still proud, still alert, but no longer haunted. His gait had changed, his eyes had softened. He no longer watched the world like it was a threat. He watched like it was something he was finally a part of again. Adam joined him at the fence, coffee in hand, steam rising in the chill. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside the boy and looked out at the same horizon. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had never been awkward. It was full of everything they'd lived through in the last few months, full of every morning chore and every wordless evening, full of every story Jamie had read aloud, every breath Stormborn had exhaled beside him, every moment that stitched them all together. "I don't want to go back," Jamie said quietly. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't even a plea. It was just a truth. Adam nodded once, slowly. "I know," he replied. "But going back doesn't mean you leave everything behind." Jamie looked at him. "But what if I forget? What if I lose it? What if this," he motioned to the ranch, the horse, the sky, "starts to feel like it was just a dream?" Adam didn't answer right away. He took another slow sip of coffee, then let the silence speak a little longer. Finally, he said, "It'll stay with you. The things that matter always do. Not like snapshots, not like souvenirs, like roots. You'll carry them with you whether you mean to or not." Jamie blinked hard, the back of his throat tight. "What about him?" he asked. "Will Stormborn be okay without me?" Adam's eyes followed the stallion as he raised his head and looked directly at them from across the field, like he knew what they were talking about. "He's got me," Adam said, "and more than that, he's got himself back." Jamie smiled, a small, tired smile. "I still don't know why he listened to me that day, why he came when I called his name." Adam shook his head slowly. "Sometimes horses don't respond to voices. They respond to presence, to what's inside the voice. You didn't just say his name, you remembered it. That's not something animals forget." The bus arrived just after noon, a swirl of dust rising behind it as it pulled up near the edge of the driveway. The driver stepped down, checked the list, nodded. Laura waved from the porch, trying not to cry as she helped zip Jamie's bag. Jamie didn't look at her yet. He had one more stop to make. He walked out into the pasture, boots damp from dew, jeans cuffed, hoodie sleeves pushed up. Stormborn turned before he even called. The stallion met him halfway, stepping lightly over the field, head lowered, breath warm in the cool air. Jamie stood still, let the horse come to him, let the moment settle. He reached out, rested one hand against Stormborn's cheek, the other gently curled in his mane. "I'll be back," he whispered. "Winter break. I promise." Stormborn huffed softly, nostrils flaring, and pressed his muzzle into Jamie's chest. Jamie closed his eyes. "Take care of Grandpa for me, okay?" He didn't try to lead him, didn't ask for anything. Just one last breath, one last look. Then he turned and walked away. Stormborn didn't follow. He didn't panic. He just stood there at the crest of the field, watching until the bus pulled out of sight. That evening, Adam rode, not for training, not for show, just because the air felt right and the world felt still. He saddled Stormborn without a word, mounted with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times and still remembered the first. Together, they rode the back pasture trail, past the creek that glimmered like glass in the fading light, past the fence post where bluebirds had nested, up the old trail that hadn't seen hooves in years. They moved slowly, both of them listening to the sound of breath and wind and memory. At the top of the ridge, Adam reined him in. They stood there for a long time, looking out over the open land. Stormborn shifted his weight, ears forward. Adam smiled faintly, patting his neck. "You did good, partner," he said softly. "Real good." Down below, the porch light flicked on. The house looked smaller without the boy inside it, but not empty, just quieter, just waiting. Adam let out a breath and turned Stormborn gently toward home. The ride back was slower, as if neither of them were in any hurry. The sun had dipped low, the stars just beginning to wake, and the wind, that old familiar voice, whispered around them like a promise. They didn't say goodbye, because some stories don't end. They just wait for the next chapter.